Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolfe and Gavin Schall here, and Immanuel Quickley did not sign an extension yesterday with the Knicks. So we're going to talk about what that means for the team. And then in our second segment and beyond, we are joined by a very special guest. Our old pal, Marc Berman, formerly of the New York Post, is going to join us to talk through the Quickley non-extension, what that means for Quickley and the Knicks, and also some thoughts on another rumor that came out about one Joel Embiid and some predictions for the season, where Mark is actually not super high on where the Knicks might be going this year. So that's all coming up next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And we want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that notification bell on YouTube or the auto download function on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And if you want to take things one step further and talk to us more often, you can join us on Subtext. There's a link in the episode description. You can talk with us. We'll update you on the latest comings and goings for the Knicks, and certainly give takes after every game so that you can get it direct from us before you even hear us in your podcast feed the next morning. But I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland. He's Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And Immanuel Quickley is unfortunately today not your favorite Knicks favorite extended Knick. He is still under his rookie contract and will remain so for this season and hit restricted free agency next summer. It is now officially official. Gavin, I found this to be a little surprising. I really thought that the Knicks were going to come to a deal. I mean, I figured it might go to the 11th hour. Granted, using RJ Barrett as a barometer last year, they certainly didn't let that go to the 11th hour. I think they finalized with RJ in August. It was basically the second that they shut off Donovan Mitchell talks, they said, okay, we're extending him now, which it makes this sort of two-pronged as far as why they didn't get things done with Quickley. One, maybe they didn't it just is as simple as they didn't agree on money. But two, I don't know if the Knicks are quite willing to pull themselves from potentially discussing star trades yet. And I wonder if part of that is why they didn't extend Quickley here too, because that would have restricted their ability to potentially trade him throughout the season. But I don't know. Either way, sort of a curveball here that he didn't end up with an extension, and now will sort of be playing for his next deal this whole season.
Yeah, I think with the benefit of hindsight, we maybe had too much faith in Leon Rose to be Superman in this situation, because we've seen under his tenure the Knicks over and over again get either like at or below like market value deals for their guys. And like, obviously the Jalen Brunson contract is aging incredibly. Julius Randle, knock on every single piece of wood in your house and your neighbor's house. If he plays like he did last year, that contract is aging incredibly well. I mean, just some of the guys that they signed over the course of the offseason, their ability to get Josh Hart to wait so they could fit DiVincenzo in, like on and on and on. Like the Knicks have seemingly won these negotiations, and it always, like on paper, it seemed like it was going to be very difficult to do that with Immanuel Quickley, because he can, and I get into this a little bit with Mark, spoiler, we actually recorded that ahead of time. Time is weird when you're podcasting. But some of his peers that signed contracts, like you look at the numbers, Jaden McDaniels got $27.5 million. Devin Vassell got $29.2 million. RJ Barrett, just to your point, off season ago, got $30 million. All guys that at least in the regular season, Immanuel Quickley is better than. But on the New York Knicks, even if he's better than those guys in a vacuum, does he have the same value that those two have to their team, and even that RJ has to the Knicks? I would argue, certainly at least on the RJ point, that he does, and it's probably not even all that close. And yet the Knicks don't ever see him as a starter. They're not going to play him next to Jalen Brunson. Obviously, Brunson is the guy, like no questions asked, they're committed to at the point guard position, presumably for a decade. So it's always going to be tough to justify giving Immanuel Quickley like exactly what he wanted, except for the fact, Alex, that the cap is just escalating to the point that I personally felt throughout this whole process, it would have been tough to overpay him. Like it would have been hard for Raymond Brothers, Immanuel Quickley's agent, to throw a number out there that I would have said if I were running the Knicks, all right, that is just too high because I think he's going to improve. I think he's always going to be movable. I think given what he's already shown in the NBA, it would be a challenge to get to a contract that you're just at a point where you're like, all right, like this isn't worth it. And maybe the one caveat there is how that number fits into a potential star deal. And to your point, we can be certain that that was on Leon Rose's mind throughout this negotiation.
Yeah, and I'm intrigued if there's more going on behind the scenes than we realize here too. Like Quick is always the consummate professional. The Knicks do really good at identifying and drafting those guys that not only are really professional on the court, but seem to always say the right things to the media, never seem to cause a stir. Even Obi Toppin, where all this stuff came out towards the end of his tenure about like him potentially having like shouting matches in the locker room with Tibbs and everything. We never heard a bit of that escape his mouth. And so it kind of makes you wonder, like Ian Begley said this on his show, The Putback, yesterday. He said, if I'm making a bet today based on what happened over the offseason, just based on stuff that you were hearing leading into today, my bet would be that Immanuel Quickley is elsewhere at the start of next season. And then said maybe it's a little pessimistic, but that's just his feeling. I feel like, just like when we talk with Berman in a sec, he was mentioning things that he's heard as well. Begley generally doesn't say stuff like that unless, at least in my opinion, unless he's heard it or unless he's getting that inclination from someone. So it almost makes you wonder if there's a little more scuttlebutt behind the scenes about Quickley wanting to start somewhere and wanting that runway to start somewhere. And maybe that was the hard line that his agent made of like, well, if you're not going to start me, at least pay me like a starter, and then the Knicks might have said, well, no, because you're not a starter. You're a sixth man, so we're going to pay you like a sixth man. Look at what the six men around the league get. That's what you're going to get. And maybe that's where the sticking point was. I guess the only thing that we'll be able to see at this point is just see him play out the season, see what improvements he makes. Obviously, if he has a big playoffs, like he has to look no further than the guy he's backing up to see what that can do for you in your career and your perception around the league. Brunson, when the Knicks paid him, some people thought that was an overpay, which is kind of comical to think about at this point. But, that's how you earn a big contract. You have a big playoffs. That's what everybody wants to see is, can you perform in the playoffs? Can you work on the biggest stage and that sort of thing? And we touch on that with Marc in a second too. We actually have a pretty wide-ranging discussion with Marc, and we talk about a lot of the other particulars of this Quickley situation. So I think now would probably be a good time to take our first break and come back in with the one and only Marc Berman. But first, we have to remind you all that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And you could snap into the NFL this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And when I say and more, maybe on the season opener tomorrow, you could check out a same game parlay for the Knicks against the Celtics. It's really fun. I love playing same game parlays. You could pick multiple different legs in a single game to make sort of a super bet. If you're like, oh, well, Julius Randle over 20 points or over 20.5 points is not going to pay that much by itself, but Julius Randle over 20.5 points, Immanuel Quickley over 1.5 threes, and Jalen Brunson over 5.5 assists will pay quite a large sum of money compared to what just one of them by themselves would pay. So it's definitely fun. Check it out. And, maybe just make some long-term player props as well. I've won big on Julius Randle for most improved a couple years ago. Should have won on Quickley for sixth man last year. But, those are always fun to keep up with for the whole season. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season and, of course, the NBA season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, and we're joined now by Marc Berman, formerly of the New York Post, now of happy retirement life, but still happy to talk Knicks, even at this early hour on a Tuesday morning. Marc, how you doing, man? How was your first retired off season for you?
Oh, it's fantastic. Enjoying Florida life quite a bit. Still writing a bit for the local paper out here, the Palm Beach Post, but still following the Knicks from afar. Talking to some people inside here and there, but Yeah, I did miss it as much as I thought, but I definitely have no regrets.
Yeah,
I'm
getting pulled out of that, it can't be too bad. But Gavin, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm happy you found a Post instead of a Gazette or a Daily News. Has to feel at home a little bit for you. We were debating on where to start this a day ago. And then luckily, or I guess not so luckily, because the deadline was there, we got the news on Immanuel Quickley, who was not able to reach an extension with the New York Knicks. Marc, I'll leave it open-ended. What was your initial impression of that happening, and what do you think the implications are down the road for both Quickley and the Knicks now?
I was not surprised at all. I mean, when I left the beat a year ago, I knew exactly where Raymond Brothers stood on a contract extension, and I knew he was shooting for the moon. Then Immanuel had a very good season, although his playoffs were disappointing again. The one thing that Knicks fans who love Immanuel fail to mention, it wasn't just his poor playoffs last spring, but even against Atlanta, he didn't perform well. It was ironic because that playoff against Atlanta, Obi really showed out against the Hawks, and Immanuel was a dud. Just looking at the stats last night, in all his playoff games, Immanuel was shooting 33% overall and 27% from three. Obviously, Immanuel has had some great games in the regular season. I've always felt he was a little streaky. He's 24 years old, but I believe that maybe he's not going to improve that much. I think maybe this is what Immanuel is. He's converted himself to a truer point guard, but I still feel he's a selfish player in terms of if he doesn't pass the ball, he loves to shoot the ball. I'm not a great fan of giving Immanuel a ton of money. I feel he's a sixth man, and to give him what Raymond Brothers wants, which was, if I recall, a year ago, I don't want to give a dollar amount, but I know I should go back to my texts, but I know he was shooting for a lot of money. And at that point, I'm like, oh boy, there's not going to be an extension here unless things change. So no surprise. And I think the Knicks at the trade deadline, we'll see what the status of the team is, but they may need help elsewhere with all their guards, and they may trade him at the trade deadline if they feel that he's going to get a better offer. And if he has a big season, okay, so match an offer. That's why you're a restricted free agent. Everyone forgets about this restricted free agency. The Knicks control the situation, and if Utah comes up big, the Knicks can match it.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting because the Knicks did something similar to this with Mitchell Robinson, though it was different rule set because he was a second round pick. But they did, they had the option to extend Mitch all the way up until the free agency in which he eventually got his new contract because of his status as a second round pick. They didn't have to do it almost a year in advance, but they did wait that out. And just to kind of keep their financial options open, they went about it that way. That said, this doesn't really seem like that, to your point. Like, to me, I look at this and it seems like they just couldn't come to terms on money, because I think I saw something that Raymond Brothers also put out, like something on social media afterwards that was like to the effect of like it was the Gladiator clip of like, are you not entertained or whatever, and then saying like never take less than what you're worth or something like that, which could reflect on Quickley. I believe he also represents Precious Achiuwa, who also didn't come to terms on an extension. So maybe it just means both of them. Maybe he was asking for the world for both clients and didn't get the world for either. But like, Marc, what was your impression on money wise? Like what Quickley was looking for? Like, did you hear anything in terms of actual dollars and cents figures? Because we saw what some of his peers were getting paid, and it seemed like a lot of the contracts handed out, other than the max deals, obviously, were like in the, I don't know, they were wide ranging. Denny Avdia got, I think it was 3 for $55. You saw some players getting average value of around $20 million. I wonder if maybe he just wanted a little more than that, but not quite up to a max deal, but I don't know. Was there anything that you heard on that front?
Yeah, well, the tag on that Instagram, I think, was "Don't sell yourself short."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was definitely Raymond. I know considers Immanuel a future All-Star, so he wants to have him paid in that type of range. So it's obviously over $20 million a year, but I don't know specifically how high Raymond was willing to go or compromise. But again, I know that the agent feels that Immanuel is destined for All-Star status, and that's the big issue with the Knicks. They don't see that from Immanuel, especially in the role he plays with Jalen Brunson as the starting point guard. There's no way that Immanuel could be a starting shooting guard in this league. I feel they did a great thing and converting him into a backup point guard. And I think that's a great role for him on a championship contender. Yeah, he could go to Utah and make, a lot more and, be on a average middling team. But I think the Knicks are trying to win a championship after 51 years, and paying Immanuel that type of money was just not what they wanted to do. Going forward, listen, let's hope Immanuel has a great year. I mean, just for this season, every season counts. Thibodeau's trying to win a championship this year. Okay, they made the second round. They didn't make any big improvements, but if Immanuel could step up in the playoffs, maybe they would have made the conference finals. In fact, if he had a very good playoff against Miami, they possibly would have ousted the Heat and gone on to face the Celtics. So let's see if Immanuel, in this particular season, if they don't trade him, can make another leap and also have a much better playoff than his inconsistent showing last spring.
We talked about it a bit in the first segment, but we can also, or at least I can see Quickley and Raymond Brothers' perspective on this, right? Because you just look at guys in his class. Jaden McDaniels got $27.2 million. Devin Vassell Jalen McDaniels, sorry. Devin Vassell got $29.2 million. And Immanuel Quickley, I think there's a very reasonable argument about who has more upside there. I mean, McDaniels is looking like he's going to maybe be the best wing defender in the league for the foreseeable future. Vassell has much better positional size. Quickley's been the best player out of those three so far. I mean, there are horde of advanced metrics that paint him as a top 30 guy in the league. For me, that's a little bit rich. But the Knicks have also just been dramatically better when he's on the court. Like, Mark, even in the playoffs that you're referencing last year, where I agree with you, he obviously didn't play well. He shot terribly. Zach Lowe of ESPN pointed out times for a guy who's a great defender, it felt like teams were targeting him. And yet the Knicks were about 20 plus points better per 100 possessions when he was on the court than when he was off the court. And that shows his value just as a spacer, as a secondary ball handler, everything he does off the ball defensively. And I'm sure him and his representation were even looking at RJ Barrett and saying RJ obviously had a better postseason than I did, but for 82 games, like I personally don't think there was any doubt Quickley was the better player. And yet to your point, like you keep coming back to, like, is he a long-term fit on this team? And that's why, like, I was kind of with you where I didn't really see a scenario where this was resolved, because the Knicks, I agree. They, even though the numbers with him and Brunson are great, they are never going to start those two together. Thibodeau's never going to be comfortable with that lack of positional size, again, even if it looks good in the regular season. And it feels like, to me, that Quickley wants more than that, and that he wants to be a starting point guard in this league. And when he was a starter last year, he put up these incredible numbers. So you're kind of at a standstill. I guess I say all this to say, like, how do you think this ultimately ends? Do you think the Knicks, like, let's just say he does have a really good season, do the Knicks match almost whatever number in restricted free agency? Do they match just to keep him as an asset for a star trade down the line? Or do you think the Knicks act early and maybe even trade him before this deadline, not wanting to get into a situation where they could potentially lose him for nothing? All right, guys, we will be back with Mark to conclude our conversation on Immanuel Quickley and then get into some season predictions, why Marc Berman is a little bit more pessimistic than we are about the Knicks finish. And honestly, Alex, he opened my eyes a little bit. He made some really, really good points. That might scare all of you a little bit. They certainly they scared me on this Tuesday morning. But before we get into that, I want to get you guys a little bit excited and give you some good news. And that's because you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. I'm lucky enough to live just 12 blocks away from Madison Square Garden. And what that means for me is I have the benefit of looking about 20 minutes before the Knicks game and just trying to find the best price and then rushing on over to enjoy a beautiful New York Knicks victory. And Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And all-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without any hidden fees. I also love that you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. With the Gametime guarantee, you'll get the best price every single time. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less on another app, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference, which means there's literally no reason to ever use a ticketing app that is not Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Well, you made a lot of good points there. One thing you didn't mention, and I was thinking about this yesterday, Immanuel and Obi Toppin, obviously great friends off the court, but I always thought they had a good chemistry together, and I always thought they made each other better when they were on the court. And now we'll see Immanuel without Obi. Naturally, Obi didn't play as many minutes as Immanuel, but they made a good tandem with both of them, high-speed players. They just had a good chemistry. I just like their chemistry, especially 2 years ago, late in the season. I know they were out of the playoff race, but yeah, IQ and Obi on the court together, they were making magic together. So how it ends, listen, Leon Rose has not come up big at trade deadline so far. They've been very conservative, very cautious. Leon does not want to lose Immanuel for nothing, and they may fear that Utah or Orlando, they're going to come up with a monster offer that they're not going to want to match. And at the trade deadline, with all the guards they have, maybe they try to get a big small forward or a power forward in a trade. And I think that's going to be a big narrative as this season unfolds, whether Immanuel will survive the trade deadline. I do believe some of these contracts are outrageous. As you mentioned, the Jaden contract, I thought was out of control. So I think it takes one team in the summer to, especially I mentioned Utah, and I know it's been reported Utah may be interested. Utah needs to overpay their free agents to get players to play in Salt Lake City. It's not a very attractive venue for NBA players. So I could see Utah really going nuts and trying to get an Immanuel on their roster. So a trade deadline situation, I'm hoping Leon can find something that works and balance the roster more. Again, there's so many guards on the team, and I believe more in Miles McBride than most people. If he just could be a little more consistent for the three-point line, you got a player who's a better defender than Immanuel, although I will give Immanuel credit. He has improved his defense, especially last season, which is why Thibodeau likes him a lot more now than he did when he first took over as Knicks head coach. But I am hoping that if Leon really senses he's going to lose Immanuel for nothing, that he pulls a trigger that makes sense for this season's roster.
So that brings us to some quick hitters, Mark, to send you off here. We figured it would be good to maximize our time with you. So we're going to, run through a couple quick extra items here and get your opinion on some things. So if you were going to pick a breakout Nick for this year? I mean, maybe you just hinted at it if you think it's going to be Deuce McBride potentially, but who do you think would be the breakout Nick this season?
Well, the important piece that they need to have a breakout season, and I mentioned this on another podcast, Quentin Grimes. I always feel he's on the verge of making it happen and becoming that clutch three-point sniper in the final minutes of games. They desperately needed that against Miami, someone who could hit that three. Evan Fournier sitting on the bench, their best three-point shooter, and the Knicks couldn't hit a three-point shot. Quentin is obviously a great individual defender and a very smart team defender, and he has a nice stroke from the three-point line. For some reason, he hasn't hit enough big shots so far in his career. They need him to take that next step, so Thibodeau will keep him on the court in the final minutes of a close game and be that difference maker in the clutch.
Yeah, and with the potential Quickley trade looming, he's a guy who could see more and more of those minutes as time goes on. And I guess along that front, you mentioned it's a possibility with Immanuel Quickley. So this could be him. This could be someone else. This could be for someone else. Do you see the Knicks making another big in-season trade? And I'll define that as maybe a Josh Hart level acquisition or greater. Or do you think it's more likely they ultimately wait for this offseason to really change anything dramatically with this team?
Yeah, in terms of a blockbuster that we've all been waiting for, Leon Rose monitoring all these situations around the league, it looks like Giannis won't be in play until his player option is due up in 3 years. Again, that Embiid report, very intriguing. So that's the only thing that could happen, I think, imminently. I have a feeling that Embiid's reps, which happen to be CAA, are a little disillusioned with the James Harden situation, which is an absolute travesty. The Harden, he opts into his contract, and all of a sudden, he opts into $36 million, and now he doesn't want to play. I mean, I know he did it, because he thought that Philly would legitimately try to trade him, but it's a travesty. Anyway, it's obviously that Joel is unhappy. He loves Leon Rose. It's a CAA situation. That report, though, giving up 3 solid players, if the Knicks are willing to give up Barrett, Randall, and Mitchell Robinson and bringing back Joel, they're going to have to do something else. I don't think there's enough on the roster to be as good as last season. I mean, that's a lot of pressure on Joel Embiid, who also is not the most durable player of all time either. So, but that's the only thing I could think of. I don't think the Towns thing is going to happen. I really don't. I think it's a mixed view in the organization on whether Towns makes them a championship contender. The whole point of this waiting and being patient is to make this blockbuster that will put them in contention to make the NBA Finals. And I'm not sure Cat is that guy. He has not proven it in the playoffs so far in Minnesota. Listen, he's a tremendous talent. I just don't know if he has the mental toughness to handle the New York City attention and focus, and he would be looked at as the savior, and I just am a little leery of it. But I think Embiid can handle it. I just think that package was a little too much, and I think we talked off camera. You guys were also wondering if we misinterpreted the report, if all 3 of those guys would be in the package, plus picks.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting situation to monitor if it ends up being all 3 of those guys in a deal. If it's 2 out of the 3, either way, even if it was only 2 out of the 3, let's say it was Mitchell Robinson and Julius Randle, for example. I mean, that's still a lot to be, trying to replace in your lineup from the rebounding and defense perspective from Mitch and the scoring perspective from Randle, though I'm sure that Embiid, if healthy, could do all 3, but we'll see how things go. You sort of answered what our next question was going to be, which star, if any, would be on the Knicks. But let's just say if you were a betting man, you could keep this brief if you want. If it's Joel Embiid versus the field for what star ends up on the Knicks, what's your confidence level of Joel Embiid versus the field?
Yeah, I think at this point, even though Towns is also a CAA guy, I do feel at this point that Embiid is the likeliest candidate, because I think that the Sixers are in a mess of a situation, and I think Embiid might be the next superstar to demand a Lillard-type trade, and maybe he won't be silly enough to say, and I'll only play for the Knicks, like Lillard said, I'll only play for the Heat, because that backfired royally. Portland did everything possible not to put Dame in Miami, and tried not to even negotiate with the Heat. So listen, if Embiid demands a trade, the Knicks will be in the mix. That doesn't mean that, they'll win the sweepstakes, but again, that trade that was with those 2 first-round picks and those 3 guys, I feel that's a little too much, but that's what it might take. And then Leon has to build around Embiid a little more and get another power forward. I mean, you don't even have Obi, as a backup power forward. You're losing Randall. You don't even have a power forward. If you make that trade, you don't even have a starting power forward. So they'll have to do some other things. Listen, Jericho Sims, he can jump through the roof, and I guess he's improved his jumper a little, but he's got to be more of an offensive player. That was the problem. I remember my final season covering the beat. They had 3 centers who couldn't shoot the ball beyond 5 feet. I mean, it was ridiculous. So, but yeah, I think Embiid is the most likeliest candidate to be traded in season. That is a superstar to be traded during the season.
All right,
Mark.
All right. We'll finish on this. How many wins do you think the Knicks finish with this year? What seed do they get? And how do they do in the playoffs when it's all said and done?
Yeah, listen, Tom Thibodeau is one of the greatest regular season coaches in NBA history. He's not backing down from his philosophy of trying to win every single game by playing Julius Randle 39 minutes a night and RJ Barrett 42 minutes a night. And I feel he's got to relax with Jalen Brunson after the World Cup. I think he's got to limit him a little more. But it's been my pet peeve with Tom ever since I started covering him on a daily basis as a head coach, that once in a while he's got to let up. Take Julius out of the game with 5 minutes left, up 14. You could risk it. But anyway, so my point is that he goes after every single game like it's a playoff game, and that's why I feel they could still squeak out 47 wins, which is probably more than their talent would dictate. But I still feel I feel there's teams in the East that have gotten better, including Indiana. I feel Cleveland's still going to be strong. The Sixers are the mystery team, but I think the East got better. I don't think the Knicks got better. I think the Knicks could actually regress. I wonder if, I know Fred Katz keeps writing about people in the organization think Jalen has another level to go to. I personally don't. I think we got the best of Jalen last season, and he's at his peak and at his prime. I know Mark Cuban thought that Jalen had hit his peak in that playoff series with Dallas when they advanced to the conference finals. I don't know if Jalen's getting any better than he is. I don't think Julius is getting any better. There's not one player on the team from the last 2 drafts. So, it's not like there's these young guys who are going to get better this year. I don't know if Immanuel is going to get better this year. I'm just concerned that, maybe RJ will be a little better because of his free throw shooting. But I see 47 wins. I see a 6th seed. I see maybe a first-round KO. I mean, I'm not as high on this squad as the rest of the nation. I think they really overachieved last season, and I was disappointed in the offseason that they did not upgrade. I don't think Dante for Obi Toppin is an upgrade.
All right. Well, that's That's a note to end on, I think. And, honestly, fair critique. I could see a world where perhaps they do not get as far as people think, especially because the rest of the East loaded up pretty well. So, I mean, it's an arms race right now. And maybe if such thing comes to pass, they feel the pressure to make that move sooner rather than later for a guy like a Joel Embiid. But Marc, thanks so much for popping on with us, man. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on the Quickley situation and everything else. Other than the Palm Beach Post, is there anywhere else that you want people to keep in touch with your writing or anything like that, or just keep up with you on Twitter?
Unfortunately, I still tweet way too much about the Knicks. So I'm going to try to scale back a little. But yeah, I'm just enjoying other things. I'm doing some teaching on the side and playing a lot of tennis. And again, when the spirit moves me, I will issue a tweet on Knicks basketball. I wish I was more positive, but it's early in the morning, so I'm still not in the greatest spirits, but I have my coffee. So, but thanks so much for thinking of me and having me on. And listen, I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping this team makes the next step and, gets to the conference finals at least. It's just been too long, 51 years. It's time. It's time to make a bigger move than a first round or a second round KO. And they've been very patient. And my patience is running out a little bit because I feel it's time. I thought this offseason would be a little better. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, guys, you do a great job, Alex and Gavin. And again, thanks for inviting me on.
All right. Yeah, thanks so much, Marc. Yep. And then we hope for everyone's sake you keep tweeting about the Knicks. All right. That's it for this episode of Locked On Knicks. Thanks to Marc Berman. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. We'll join you tonight to recap the first game or tomorrow night to recap the first game of the regular season. But until then, we'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.